Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing my May wrap-up video. So I finished 14 books this month. I read 6 of them on my Kindle, I listened to 6 audiobooks, and I read 2 physical books. So for the books that I don't have physical copies of, I will put pictures of as I talk about them so you can see their beautiful covers. And I have the books behind me that I actually read. So the first book that I finished this month in May was The Upside of Unrequited by Becky Albertalli. I rated it 5 stars. I love all of her books. I don't think that I've given any of them lower than 5 stars, and I'm currently reading Kate in Waiting, and so far that one's going to be at least 4.5, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be 5 stars. So The Upside of Unrequited is about these twins, Molly and Cassie. And Molly has had so many crushes, and she's never had requited love. Cassie, on the other hand, fools around a lot. She has a lot of girlfriends, and she tells Molly to quote-unquote woman up. So Cassie meets this girl and becomes this lovesick girl, and Molly is a little bit jealous of her because she feels like this girl that Cassie is seemingly falling in love with is taking her away from Molly. So Cassie's new girlfriend has a cute guy friend, and so they try to set Molly up with him, and she thinks she's not worth it because she's a little bit on the heavy side and she's very unhappy with the way that she looks. And when she starts this new job, she meets a kid in the store that she works at who is this big nerd and loves Tolkien and goes to Ren Fair and all of this stuff. And so maybe there could be love in it for her too. Who knows? But I adored this book. There's nothing else that I can say. This book was fantastic. I just think that Becky Albertalli is an amazing author, and I read almost all of her books in May. The only book that I haven't read yet is Kate in Waiting, and that is going to be finished in June. So the next book that I finished is Leah on the Offbeat, also by Becky Albertalli, and I also gave that one 5 stars. So Leah's a drummer. She's in a girl band, and she loves it. She is one of Simon's best friends from Simon versus the Homo sapiens agenda, and she's a little bit different than the rest of her friends. So her mom is really young and she's single, and Leah is bisexual and she came out to her mom, but her best friends don't know. So that leads to some issues, especially when she kind of realizes that she may like somebody unconventional a little bit more than she initially thinks. This book, again, read it in maybe 2 days. Loved it. I mean, there's really nothing else that I can say about Becky Albertalli's books except that they're so much fun. They are LGBTQ friendly, and they're so fantastic. The next book that I read is also by Becky Albertalli, and it's Love Creekwood, and I gave that 5 stars too. So this book is like a companion to the Simon verse. So it's emails written between the group when they are off at college. The end of Leah on the Offbeat is they all go off to college, and it's just so much fun to see what they've been up to in the year that they've been away at school. And I can't really explain anymore without giving spoilers for Leah on the Offbeat and Simon versus the Homo sapiens agenda. So, sorry. If you like the Simon books, though, definitely read this one. It's a very cute conclusion, and it'll be totally worth your while. The next book that I finished, I listened to. It was an audiobook, and it was Third Degree by James Patterson. This one I gave 4 stars, my first 4-star read of the month. So this book started off kind of slow, but the main character, Lindsay, is walking her dog, and there's a huge explosion in a house, and she finds 3 people dead inside. One little boy she saves him, and in talking to one of the victims' siblings, finds out that they had a baby, and they don't know where the baby is. So that starts off an investigation, and none of them really know where it's going to take them. And unfortunately, one member of the Women's Murder Club gets caught in the crossfire and dies. I thought this was really good. I really like all of the Women's Murder Club series. I just think that this one started off a little bit slower, but by the end, I was hooked and I couldn't stop reading. The next one that I finished was Yes, No, Maybe So by Becky Albertalli and Aisha Saeed. I gave this one 5 stars as well. So this is about Jamie and Maya. So Jamie's mom is very into the Democratic Party, and she is helping canvass for his campaign. And she decides that Jamie has to do it also. But Jamie is terrified of public speaking. He's terrified of speaking in general. And then he meets Maya. And Maya is Muslim, and it's in the middle of Ramadan. And it's her best friend's last summer before she goes off to college. And her best friend isn't around. And so her mom decides that she's going to go canvassing for this political candidate. And she meets Jamie, and she doesn't really understand why she has to do this. And then they become friends, and from there, things happen that I can't tell you about because I don't want to give it away. But I love this book too. This one started out a little bit slower for me. I wasn't sure if I was going to love it because of the political aspect of it, but the main plot of the story doesn't really have anything to do with the political campaign. It's more about Jamie and Maya individually and together. So I thought this one was also great. The next one that I finished is 4th of July by James Patterson. I gave this one 4 stars as well. This one was very stressful to read, or to listen to, I should say. So the main character, Lindsay, at the beginning of the story, ends up shooting these 2 kids, and the family presses charges, and she is suspended for a little while, and so she decides to take a trip to her sister's house a little outside the city, and there are a string of murders going on that she can't help but stick her nose into and try to help figure them out. And then she's on trial for the shooting, and it's very action-packed. It was very stressful to listen to. Every time I was in the car, I didn't want to get out of the car. It was so good. The next book that I read, that I can't really give you a synopsis on, only because that'll ruin the first book, is Siege and Storm by Leigh Bardugo, the sequel to Shadow and Bone. So I gave this one 5 stars. If you don't know about Shadow and Bone, I can't really give you a description of Siege and Storm, but in Shadow and Bone, the main character, Alina, and her friend Mal are both in the First Army, and they are traveling across the Fold, or the Unsea, which is this big section of darkness. And these Volcra, which are like flying bat dragon things, attack their ship their sand ship while they're going across the sand. And Alina finds that she has Grisha magic, and she is the sun summoner. And so she gets thrown into the world of the Grisha, and chaos ensues. The first book is absolutely crazy. This book was even better than the first one. I gave the first one 5 stars, I believe, as well, but this one I would have given 5.5 if I could have. This book is fantastic. So I don't really how to explain what the book was about, since I don't want to spoil anything for those of you that haven't read it. So read the series, because the next book that I finished was Ruin and Rising, which I also gave 5 stars, which is the 3rd book in the Shadow and Bone trilogy. So I thought that this was the best book in the series. I know that a lot of people think that it's flipped. So Shadow and Bone was amazing, and then Siege and Storm was less so, and then Ruin and Rising was less so. But I think that it went the other way. So I thought that Shadow and Bone was pretty good. If I could amend, I'd probably give Shadow and Bone 4 stars, Siege and Storm 4.5, and then Ruin and Rising 5. Ruin and Rising, it took me the shortest amount of time to read. I fell in love with all the characters. We met new characters, and I just fell in love with every single one of them. just read the series. I think that I'm going to do like a review on the series, and I'm going to talk about each book individually. So if you are interested in that, or if you want to contribute, that would be awesome. So that'll happen maybe this weekend. I don't know. I have to find time, but that's definitely something that I've been considering. The next book that I listened to / followed along with, because I happen to have it, is The Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin. My husband has been trying to get me to read these books for a really long time, and I didn't have anything to listen to, so he suggested that I read this because they're pretty short. These books it's less than 200 pages. It's like 144 pages, so the audiobook wasn't that long. I gave this 3.5 stars. The first book for me was very confusing. I had to restart the audiobook in my car maybe 3 or 4 times. I don't know if it was because he hyped it up so much or because I just couldn't focus when I was in the car listening to it. I don't know. So the book is about this sorcerer named Ged who was reckless when he was younger, and he summoned a shadow that followed him around and caused terrible things to happen. And so the book was basically about him and how he got rid of the shadow. And I feel like at another time I would have loved this series. I'm going to continue it because I'm interested to see if I will like more of it. But this is a fairly old book, like I said in one of my other videos. I have a lot of older books on my book list, and this is one of them. I think this book came out in the 1960s. So she's a great author. She writes a lot like Tolkien, so there's a lot of world building and a lot of character development, and his books are very hard for me to read, so I wasn't sure how I was going to like this one, and turns out 3.5 stars. I don't know. Be your own judge. The next book that I listened to was The Fifth Horseman by James Patterson. I also gave this one 5 stars. I feel like we're seeing a pattern. Most of the books that I read, I give very high ratings to because I tend to not read books I don't think I'm going to like, which I feel like everybody does. So this one was about the main character, Lindsay, and her friend Yuki, who was her lawyer in the 4th of July. And unfortunately, Yuki's mom dies in a hospital that's under siege because there are a lot of mysterious patient deaths, and Yuki is concerned that her mother's death was in the same vein as those other mysteries. So it was really interesting. It was so heartbreaking, some of them, to listen, even in the audiobook, to just listen to some of the family's accounts, even though it's fiction. One of them talked about his son, and it was terrible. So the next book that I read was Realmbreaker. I gave this 3.5 stars. I'm so upset that I gave it 3.5 stars. So this is Victoria Aveyard's newest book. She wrote the Red Queen series. I love that series. That's one of my favorite series of all time. I think that the hype got to me on this one. So for weeks and weeks and weeks before the book came out, people that had arcs were reading them and saying that it was fantastic and, you know, you need to read this book. It's amazing. It's like the B team. And I wanted to like it so much. This book, I felt like, took me forever to read. And at the end, I could only give it 3.5 stars. It follows Coraine and Amaret in her quest to close the spindles. It's kind of a confusing premise. So at the beginning, there's a huge battle, and all of the people that you would expect to be going on this quest end up dying. And then one of the immortals comes and finds her because she's the last of her line, and she's the last one with core blood that can use the spindle blade to close the spindles. And like I said, I wanted to like this book so much. I was so disappointed. She's writing the second book, so when the second book comes out, I'm going to try to go back to this one. I'm wondering if I read it again after the hype has died down a little bit, that maybe I'll like it more. I don't know. I apologize. My dog is having a fit of some sort. The next book that I listened to was The Sixth Target by James Patterson, 5 stars. This one I briefly talked about in my reading blog, I believe. There was a shooting on a ferry, and there were a whole bunch of witnesses, and it turns out that he was schizophrenic, and the voices told him to do it, so he gets put on trial, and then he gets sentenced to a mental facility instead of jail. This one was crazy because the narrator did his voice so well. I thought that we were listening to somebody with schizophrenia having a conversation with himself. It was crazy. Something really cool happens in this book, though. Don't want to spoil it, but they all continue on. So in the book that I'm listening to now, The Seventh Horseman, which is the sequel to this one, it just feeds off of that. So there are 2 more books, and then I will finish this very, very long wrap-up video. So the next book that I read was Silka's Journey by Heather Morris, 5 stars. This book was absolutely amazing. It's about Silka, who is 16 years old when she gets to Auschwitz, and how she survives in Auschwitz, and then when the Russians come in to get rid of the camps, she gets sent to a Siberian prison camp, and how she survives in there. And at the end, she's alive and well, and she finds love. And I think that for somebody who lived through the Holocaust, especially somebody that lives in Auschwitz-Birkenau, that's just amazing. I also mentioned this in my weekly reading vlog, but it was very hard for me to listen to this one as opposed to reading The Tattooist of Auschwitz. This one was read by a woman, and there were just so many emotions throughout this whole book. I definitely made the right decision listening to it rather than reading it. I don't know if reading it, the things that I saw in my head I'd be able to handle, but listening to it for some reason made it a little bit more palatable. The last book that I finished this month was The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert. I love this book. The beginning was really fast. It slowed down a little bit in the middle, and then once you got to a certain point, the end just flew. If you want like a slightly creepy, fun read, definitely read this, because it takes some twists and turns that you really don't necessarily see coming, or at least I didn't, but I'm also really bad at guessing what's going to happen in books. So I went over this in my reading blog, but this book follows Alice and her mother, who basically spend their life